Hello, and welcome to the second series of the Kingston Grammar School podcast. Just a few words for any listeners who are new to KGS. Kingston Grammar School is an independent co-educational day school located in Kingston upon Thames in southwest London. With the school motto of work well and be happy ever present, Kingston Grammar School is one of the most successful co-educational schools in all of the UK. Alongside top-notch academics, an extensive co-curricular program, including sport, theatre, art and music, also plays a central role in the success and well-roundedness of KGS and its students. I'm your host, Shannon Delwish, and regardless of what brought you here or how you came to find us, I know that as one of our listeners, you'll start to feel more a part of the inclusive KGS community. In this first episode of 2022, we will challenge the way we see the world, the ways in which our society works, and our roles in all of it. In conversation today is Jon Alexander, old Kingstonian and author of Citizens, Why the Key to Fixing Everything is All of Us, a book that seeks to reframe the moment in time we're living in as one of huge civic opportunity, not just crisis and collapse, and in doing so, opens up a world of possibility for organizations and leaders across sectors and across the world. In this episode, Headmaster Stephen Lehec and I speak to Jon about his book, and I was so looking forward to this conversation. I kind of just dove straight in there. To kick off our discussion, I wanted to read a few excerpts from the foreword of your book, Citizens, as written by Brian Eno, another thought leader.
Somewhat more established than myself, some might say, but we'll get there.
For now.
We'll get there.
For now. Stories matter. They can trap us, but they can also inspire us. The stories we tell shape how we see ourselves and how we see the world. When we see the world differently, we begin behaving differently, living into the new story. The Citizen story is about the empowerment of us all to co-invent and nurture our own futures. Equipped with the ideas in this book, what I now see is not just a climate emergency, it's a civilizational opportunity. So I just wanted to kick off with civilizational opportunity.
What I'm trying to do in the book really is to say, look, we need to be able to see the rising and the growing and the emerging rather than just the declining and the breaking. Mm-hmm. Because unless we do so, we will actually make the declining and the breaking a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy. So this idea of a civilizational opportunity is one in which we notice that all over the world, participatory democracy is taking shape. In the city of Paris, they've just instituted a standing citizens' assembly, which will play a role analogous to, in some ways, to our House of Lords, made up of randomly selected citizens who can then shape their city and hold the elected council to account. Mm-hmm. In Chile, there's a constitutional convention going on, driven by the citizens. In the world of business, there's new modes of business emerging. The narrative of purposeful business is really becoming the central narrative. This whole sort of span of really exciting, very powerful developments taking place that really could add up to something that unlocks a hugely positive future.
I think a lot of the work we do as citizens seems co-curricular, if you know what I mean. It's the things that we do when we don't have to do real work. It should be the real work. It should be the way that we address and participate in real life. It's the volunteering that we do at the weekends, but making that the way that we do business and school.
You're absolutely right, Shannon. And the stuff that Jon was describing there is mammoth. And it's all over the world and taking part in these little pockets where people are saying, let's do things differently. And people can say, but what can I do that is as grand and as influential as that? I love, and I'd be really interested to kind of hear how you came up with it. That's a very simple table that says, okay, you can be the subject, or you can be a consumer, or you can be a citizen, and in lots of different ways, and how it's all compared against each other in this really simple table.
So I talk about 3 columns: subject, consumer, citizen, corresponding to what I see as the 3 underlying stories that compete to shape who we are and how we behave in any given situation. So I talk about subjects as people who have stuff done to them, consumers have people who have stuff done for them, and citizens as people who do stuff together with and through organisations.
Yeah. And how did that table come about? And is it one of the most influential aspects of, you're hoping that people will adopt that idea?
The world that I lived in as a 19, 20-year-old, a couple of years out of school, was the world where the Twin Towers came down and the leaders of the free world, so-called, came out and told us all to go shopping, right? Like that there was much less obvious questioning of the mode of our society in that time.
And the cost of behaving in that manner.
Exactly.
To be a consumer was a good thing because it drove well-being, because everybody was a little bit more affluent as a result of, so buy.
Right. A rising tides will lift all boats. If the economy grows, we all thrive.
Yeah.
And trickle down. Obviously, they were under question in some spheres, but they weren't really under question at that time. I was at university, I was rowing. It was then that my rowing career sort of came to something of a stop when it became clear I wasn't going to be an Olympic athlete. And I sort of stumbled into the advertising industry. And my first boss described my job to me by saying, what you've got to remember is that the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day. And your job is to cut through that. And for a while, the competitor was like, cut through, make mine the best. And then I was like, hang on. I came to a point where actually February 2010, I think it was, for one day I was standing on the platform at Oxford Circus Tube Station on my way home from work. And actually that day I stood on the platform and watched a couple of trains pass and ended up like being physically sick on the platform. And that happened every day for a week, and then I resigned. But we know that the structures and modes of our society needs to change. This is about the pervasiveness and ubiquity of advertising and sales messages. But it's also that this narrative takes its shape and replicates itself in many other ways and aspects of our lives. Humans are citizens by nature, I believe. We are collaborative, creative, caring creatures. One of my favourite examples comes from a friend of mine called Stephen Green, who is one of the founders of a thing called RotCorps and also of the National Citizen Service in this country. So RotCorps was a thing where you had to do 4 hours of community action as a young person aged, I think, 16 to 23. And that was the only way you could get this exclusive gig ticket. And what they found was that something like 90% of the young people who did this 4 hours had never done community action before, had never done volunteering before. But what they then found was that 80% of them went on to do more.
The benefit was the action itself rather than the incentive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They did the initial for the external incentive, but then they found, Stephen's metaphor, he talks about citizenship as a muscle you build, not a cup you empty.
Yeah, I like that.
And you start to work it and you start to enjoy it and you start to sort of look in the mirror and go, yeah, I like myself a bit more, and you want to do more of it.
And just like some examples in your book about how people responded to the COVID pandemic. If we were intrinsically evil and selfish, we wouldn't have, within the first few days, just what can I do, which was the response over I need to hide and protect myself.
The way the stories were told in the early onset of the pandemic is a really good way to encapsulate the work that I'm doing. So what happened in those first days in this country was a deep uncertainty at the level of our leaders. And what we did as citizens was we started leaning in, right? As you say.
Communities coming together.
Yeah. And then do you remember the NHS First Responder Scheme?
Absolutely.
So
many people signed up.
Right. This was set up for 250,000 people to sign up in 3 weeks. That was the traffic and and 750,000 signed up in 48 hours, and the thing crashed. In Taiwan, one of the stories I tell in the book, they basically treated the challenge of COVID as a national team effort. They did things like setting up a phone line where any citizen could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better. And imagine if we had done that.
Yeah.
If the message change hadn't been from stay home to stay alert, but had been from stay home to let's do this together. We need you're doing amazing things. We need to fund councils to learn from each other about supporting this community. That could have happened. Instead, because we're so fixated and so stuck within the subject and consumer stories, and that is a consumer story message. The counterexample, though, the flip of that situation, I did quite a lot of work, didn't really end up using too much of it in the book, but I did quite a lot of work investigating QAnon and conspiracy theories as part of this. Because what I found was that these things are incredibly participatory. So the pitch of QAnon is essentially, we need you. Like, we need you to help us stop this conspiracy that's destroying our nations. And that gives people agency. It gives people a role. And when QAnon and these darker co-options of this instinct are offered, then that is a big part of their success. They offer belonging, they offer agency, they offer ownership, they offer meaning in a world when we are being told, shush little people, just go shopping.
I have a sense that the kind of participatory nature of society during the pandemic could have led to an evolution of citizenship. But now that we seem to have kind of rode back on that quite significantly, do you feel that any change is only going to be achieved by a form of revolution.
He's not your average establishment headmaster, is he?
Nope.
He asks the important questions.
So, I agree. Look, I think there will be more moments. I haven't found a perfect metaphor for them yet. Like sliding doors moments is one way of putting it. It's like the doors will open and we will have the chance to step into the new story, but they will then close again and the train will leave.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why I chose to sort of substance the book on the story of the Taiwanese government that I was just alluding to was because there was a moment there where, I won't go into the full background, you'll have to read the book, people, but there was a moment there where students had occupied the parliament and people were coming in behind the students to some degree, but they hadn't come in fully. And pressure came on the Speaker of the Parliament to boot them out. But what he did was he said, this is what democracy looks like. This is what this space is for. He endorsed the protesters.
Amazing.
Wow.
And that moment flipped the whole story. Within 6 months, there were municipal elections and candidates who'd stood by the protesters were elected. Within 2 years, there were presidential elections, and one of the organisers and leaders of the protest movements became a minister in her own right, and it was she who was part of leading the country's COVID response. And if he had done what everyone says was the most likely thing for him to do, then Taiwan wouldn't be where it is now. There will be more and more of these moments.
Right.
By the nature of the very fact that the consumer story is inherently unsustainable in every sense of the word, it will crack and there will be more of these. And what I do think is true in the way you framed that is that the more trains we allow to depart the station, the more crunching it will be.
Yeah, the more painful it will be because we haven't let the light in. We haven't taken those sliding door opportunities to make a change and make it evolutionary because we've just ignored the
We
issues.
all know, right, time isn't in our hands. India, 62 degrees centigrade the other day.
Oh my gosh.
Right, this is real. I'm not saying, I don't come from a place in this work of going, follow me, I've got the answer. I come from a place in this work of going, geez, I think I've stumbled on something.
A lot of these ideas are feelings. I remember when people were saying things are going to go back to normal and things are starting to go back to normal, and just a feeling of my heart like dropping a little bit, like something has felt really nice about how things have been.
Can I shoehorn in?
Yes.
Stephen has to go and
Yes.
teach some students
Yes.
soon.
I have to go and educate some students in how to be citizens through their first year history class and getting ready to take exams, which is not going to be very, the poor things. They'd probably rather I didn't turn up. But what I was going to say was during the pandemic, I started some courses to study financial accounting, economics, marketing, and finished those courses and thought, okay, I now feel more educated in the world of business, but what next? I stumbled across one course that was sustainable business strategy. I thought, okay, I'll do that one. And then you start following little kind of rabbit holes of interest, stumble across Jon Alexander and Citizens, and another group called the Kindness Bank, another group called This Is Me Mentoring, that they're being mentored by the 17 Goals Mentoring Society. Thinking, this stuff fits together. And what obviously attracted me to what Jon was doing was the fact he was an alumnus of Kingston Grammar School. So then looking into it deeply and thinking, he is expressing all the stuff I don't know how to express in Citizens. And actually then we've started at school a Kindness Council, which is kind of the democratic council of staff and students about what can we do to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I think when people first stumble across that, they think, oh, right, so that's just sustainability. That's just kind of ethical practice. Look at it. It's about equality, it's about education, it's collaboration, it's partnership, it is mentoring, it's support, as well as gender equality, racial equality, opportunities around the world. And I think it's a vehicle that's been there for a long time that would allow people to say, right, this is what I can do. But people are afraid of it because they think, so does that mean I have to do it all? But I think what Jon's book crystallizes for me is that you don't have to do it all. You just have to change the way you think and operate, not what anybody else does, but what you do. And that to me is incredibly powerful.
Thank you. Just to offer a reflection for you, Lee, I think one of the reasons I think this work resonates with people is that it doesn't require us to be saints, right?
Absolutely.
And one of the deepest problems of the consumer story is that it does require anyone who wants to stand up and try and say we can be better than this to be a saint. It requires you to never fly, to never eat meat, to turn down your washing machine. You have to have done all of those individual actions and you have to do them all the time. That erects this enormous barrier.
Absolutely.
The citizen story, the citizen mode of change says, choose something, some aspect of your life, and then put the bat signal up So say like, I want to make this better. Find where your joy is, find where you belong, and find what you're passionate about. And then critically find the others. And only then decide what to do. We are exponential creatures in the sense that when there are more than one of us, our actions and our agency multiplies rather than just adds.
We're hoping, as I sign off, to go off and teach these wonderful students who've got the benefit of my wisdom in other ways. We're going to see lots more of you, and we're going to do some live events, do some book signings. And so anybody listening to this podcast, either now or in retrospect, kind of in days, weeks, months to come, can always contact the school or look out for the works of Jon Alexander and themselves become citizens just through learning a bit more about it. And we hope it will become a strength of the school and, in a way that we can maybe influence others as well to come join us.
So thank you very much, Jon. It's been great talking to you. Thank you, Headmaster Stephen Lehek, as well.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks especially to Jon for being with us today.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Kingston Grammar School podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Jon Alexander and join in on the Citizen Story conversation, head on over to jonalexander.net, no H in John, where you will find direct links to his Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook accounts. And he's very active on those, so pop on over. Join us next week when I'm back with Jon to hear more about his time as a student at KGS and how that chapter in his life provided a valuable foundation in humility that has supported the crucial work he's doing today. We would like to hear from you. Get in touch to tell us what you're enjoying about the podcast and join other listeners in suggesting topics which you'd like to learn more about. You can email us at podcast@kgs.org.uk. And there are endless platforms on which you can access this podcast. Spotify, Apple, Acast, Amazon, SoundCloud, or YouTube for starters. So please recommend this podcast to friends and family as it is so easily accessible to any and everyone. And remind them it's free. Oh, and follow, download, or subscribe to the series, and do take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It takes but a moment, and it makes a huge difference to us because it makes us more visible for those who are searching for us. Special thanks to our guests in this episode, Jon Alexander and Headmaster Stephen Lehek. Thank you also to Allison Williams, Director of Marketing and Admissions at Kingston Grammar School. This has been an Applied Reality production, produced by Shannon Vandermark with assistant producer George Powell, sound design by Alex Marcoux.